Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
I'll just tell you a few things about Father Shaw. If you saw the recent PBS 6-hour special on religion in America, you may have seen him, unless you blinked. He was telling me they filmed him for 3 hours, but he was only on for like 30 seconds. So we're going to give him more time today than. Now, Father Shaw has been a priest for 40 years. Most of it's been spent in the criminal justice system. He's also the author of 5 books. Here's Father Shaw to tell us about the book, American Grace, How Religion Divides and Unites Us. So here he is.
Being an expert on the topic itself, I'm reading and giving my impressions of the book. One thing title-wise, my original title of the book you just described, Pentecost Eve, was, and somebody gagged when I told them when it was a manuscript, A View from a Pew in 1962. Which was very descriptive of what it was. I wanted to see who was ready or not ready for this cultural change that was going to happen. And I decided that was a tacky title. All the way through this book, they keep referring to A View from a Pew. And I thought, I should have kept that title. Could have played off on them. The book, American Grace, How Religion Divides and Unites Us. And the 2 authors, Robert Putnam, he wrote a book called Bowling Alone, which was a bestseller a year or 2 ago. And then David Campbell, sociologist. And it is not a work of theology. It's a work of sociology, of observing that fact. And my references to it will be sociological. I hope not to make any theological statements about different denominations and so forth. And I mean just to spin what they have. The overall idea of the book, given in the subtitle, that we're a very even polarized people in all the different religions that we have sharing the same turf in the United States, but nonetheless we are very tolerant of one another. One review I read of the book, it was Commonweal, disagreed with the emphasis. They attributed this to everybody managing to live on the same turf and gradually accustom ourselves to one another. And in a lesser level, attribute that toleration to the Constitution. I think I would go the other way, and so did the reviewers in Commonweal. I think that we can just, be thankful for the fact that an amazing group of people who got together and gave us the Constitution as we know it, gave us a leash and a prodding rod that has kept us from being our own worst selves. Look at the issue that they didn't resolve in the Constitution, slavery, and how we let ourselves into, fighting a war against ourselves because of that. It never happened with religion. One of the books I wrote was a biography of Archbishop John Hughes of New York. He was the man who built St. Patrick's Cathedral, but arrived in this country as a teenage ditch digger and became a priest. And he was not a nice guy. As I've said to people, on his best days, he was like Harry Truman. Those were his best days. Worst days, slightly like King Kong. But he would always throw into the face of the nativists in this country, you've got to give us equal rights. It's your rule. You wrote it. And it was always a saving grace. It was John Hughes that got me on that PBS special, because that ended up in the classic 1840s fight about what you can do and not do in public schools. The book that was out here, Philbrook's Mayflower, very good book, kind of disagrees with a direct quote in a paragraph in this book where they're talking about how the pilgrims arriving in this country in the 1620s searching for religious freedom, that becomes kind of a hallmark of what we are. And if any of you read the Philbrook book, they may say that. They arrived here looking for religious freedom for themselves. They were not tolerant toward other groups. Where Mayflower is a very fine book. They're very slow and or Philbrook is very slow and open to the idea that the first generation did a great job of necessity with the natives here. The natives didn't see them as an overwhelming force that were going to take away their land. And in that first generation, the native tribes of New England became acclimated to a lot of European ways of looking at things, and vice versa. It was the next generation of Puritans that totally forgot what they owed to the natives and came down very hard if you're not exactly like we are. Nor were they open to other religious groups, the founding of Rhode Island, that sort of thing. So that tradition doesn't really come innately from the people, as they would tend to say here. It's only in the 1880s you have the last established religions in states, on a state level in this country. We free ourselves of that. I referred to John Hughes, pitched battles during the 1840s in Philadelphia, 3 of the 5 Catholic churches being burned to the ground. We were not nice to one another. We grow beyond that. It's in the 1920s that the Democratic Party makes the disastrous decision to nominate the governor of New York State, Alfred E. Smith, who was a Catholic, and it became a debacle. There's one newsreel shot that, when it's shown in a history perspective, always seems frightening to me. It's of Pennsylvania Avenue and the Ku Klux Klan. Has anybody seen the same shot? By the thousands marching in Washington. They had died pretty much in the 1870s. And in fact, if you, not in the movie, but in the book Gone with the Wind, when Scarlett at one point asks Rhett, "Are you in the Klan?" And he says, "Oh, Scarlett, that's so passé," because it was a momentary thing. But it was a motion picture, The Birth of a Nation, which regenerated the Klan and made it a very popular thing, not just only against former slaves, African Americans, but against Jews, against Catholics. It was going to be their America. So, and they never mentioned the Klan. So it wasn't that warm, fuzzy growth toward one another that became the thing. They point out that in 1960, the great question in the election of John F. Kennedy, and I've always thought one of the best on the scene, so close to the scene, Theodore Wright's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Making of a President in 1960, which is a classic because he wrote it, the ink wasn't even dry yet on the election results. And he wrote that book. He was a newspaper correspondent and was with the campaign. And I always tell young people, especially if they've grown up in a far more open age than what many of us knew, read that book, because the attitudes about religion, you cannot be president of the United States if you are a Catholic, is so strong. They point out, and it's a very interesting observation, in 1960 the question was, can you run for office if you are a particular denomination? In the last couple of campaigns, the question is, if you're running for office, how religious or not religious are you? So that you have, a liberal group saying, we have to be totally secular. It was a rabbi who is the editor of the Jewish magazine Tikkun, who came out with a very good article after not this past election, but the election before it, saying ultimately the Kerry campaign left religious people with nowhere else to go because it was so, hostile, according to him, towards the idea of being religious at all. And I don't want to get political. I'm quoting an article, but just, an editor of a religious magazine looking to say, where else could we go but to go with the religious light? And there was a couple of basic issues that brought that out. Talking about churches and issues that have been very important in the evolving of the way we are in the United States. It's in the latter part of the book, in a separate chapter. Any of you who have read this book know that it's kind of a potpourri. It has its major theme, and then they go off into minor themes. It's a fun read. It's a very enjoyable read. But you'll find yourself going down side paths. In fact, that one review that said they disagreed with his main point said, but it's an awful lot of fun getting there. It's just an interesting read. And if you're talking about, okay, how much does religion, as in all the denominations put together, really affect life in the United States? The 3 issues they take are women's issues, ethnic and race issues, and the issues of haves and have-nots in this country. With women's issues, they would say, It was going to happen whether the churches were behind it or for you. They will say of these major issues that you can find religious people on both sides of the barricades. That's their quote. You'll have religion pushing for an issue in small groups, but then people of the same denomination, whatever the denomination is, pushing against it as well. Women's issues were born of women. And in even denominations that get very fundamentalist in following the Bible, that a man is the ruler of his wife, that sort of thing. In those denominations, women went to work in the same numbers that they did in very liberal. They had to. The nature of our economy required people to get out to just run a home. You need a husband and wife. It's a sad thing of our present day and age. The white picket fence rarely exists anywhere. It costs a lot to keep our kids in school, that sort of thing. Women went to work. The other issues clicked in, but no religion can really claim, okay, we did that, we put that together. One of the things on that front page of the issue, that being, are we tolerant of one another because of Constitution or where we are? They point out the vagueness of our civil religion, civic religion. Every now and then when you see people take our founding fathers and quote them as if they were the most religious people in the world, and you go back and you read the bios of each one of them, and they'll be agnostic at best. But right away as politicians, they always knew, Thomas Jefferson included, that God has ordained this, that we do that sort of thing. Some people are shocked to find out that neither Abraham or Mary Lincoln was very religious. But they both knew that, especially Abraham, knew his Bible very well. But they were very not sure of themselves about where they would be with eternity of the Almighty, even when the loss of children with the Lincolns. But without going down that road, they were very sure that they would include it in public speeches. We have a civic religion, and that is a very important thing in this country. But as far as pushing major issues, the slavery issue, denominations come down on both sides and are on both sides of the barricades. And for instance, it's no virtue that those of us who are in the Catholic Church can say we were pretty much free of that, because it was just that we came in on late on the scene. But the major Protestant denominations, Methodist, some of the Southern Methodist, Southern Baptist, that sort of thing would break that way. Of all the clergymen I've ever known, a fellow chaplain at the Albany County Jail, Reverend Ron Duncan, African-American Baptist, I've always felt closer to him theologically than any Catholic priest I've ever met. I mean, we were really on a wavelength, and we got to be very good friends over there. He was from Georgia. And it was one time, I think in the 80s, when it was a Catholic priest who was African-American, who in Washington, D.C., broke away from the Catholic Church and started a small church. He's since disappeared. He was kind of like a boomlet moment, if you will. And Ron brought up the question. He said, it's interesting that not more blacks are Catholics. And I said, Ron, we didn't own you. I said, you're from Atlanta. Have you ever seen Gone with the Wind? He said, of course. I said, remember the first scene of the movie where the O'Haras of Tara are praying specifically, it's a Catholic prayer, they're praying the Confiteor. And Scarlett's thinking, she doesn't know I love him. And she gets the elbow and she starts paying attention to prayers. And I said to him, Ron, how typical of the Old South is that? He laughed so hard that he hit his knees laughing. He said, you're right. He said, that would have been as scarce as, but Margaret Mitchell happened to be nominally a Catholic at least, and wrote from the perspective of Irish immigrants, rare as they may have been, in Georgia, giving us the quintessential Southern belle, who was not at all quintessential as it turned out. But one of the reasons when you get into breaking down Protestant denominations, according to the book, and as I read it in the book, I said, no, I don't want to go with that. And I thought, no, you're right, I have to go with that. He divides, for instance, evangelical churches into evangelical as evangelical. But then he says, and then black Protestants. And, I reacted to that saying, no, I don't want to define a church by race. And they insist, no, you do. Because it's remembering the whole slavery experience. The whole makeup of the church to this day, it involves the African-American history, and that comes together as a denomination. And I could say, okay, I buy that. But you throw into that race issue, and how much did the churches really move civil rights? Wouldn't you agree? An honest study of it says they were on both sides of the issue. It comes down to individuals, not to the denomination, saying, we will do this. And the only reason there weren't a lot of Catholic slaves is because we just arrived so late and we weren't on the scene. When you get into the issue of haves and have-nots, the book is very good on that. In the 19th century, we were very much a have and have-not nation. The Irish riots in 1863 in New York City, which until the Watts riots of the 1960s were the worst riots this country had ever known. It was shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg, and they had to divert Union troops to New York City to quell it. 3 days it went on. It was because the draft had been instituted. And in the riots that happened, Irish were killing any African American they met on the street. And it's been looked to as being a race moment. It wasn't. It was a poverty moment, because so many Irish had died in the Battle of Gettysburg. But basically the Civil War, in which the immigrants had no interest whatsoever. They neither owned slaves nor wanted to free slaves. But it was very much a New England, Puritan argument, pro, against, that sort of thing. But it had become a rich man's war and a poor man's battle, because the rich could buy their way out of Lincoln's draft, which was initiated in the summer of 1863, thus those draft riots. It was a painful moment of history. When this book gets on talking about differences in denominations, they have all sorts of graphs, charts, and maps with heavy shading on it to show you can't just talk about, for instance, evangelical churches and use terms like right wing. You have to say, where are they centered geographically? They're almost always in the South and in the Southwest. So you have to learn to define your issues and divide them. Are we talking here because of a geographic base or because of a religious base? It gets very complicated when they were doing that. However, in the 20th century, especially after post-World War II, we had this boom time in this country like we've never known. And that decreased the difference between haves and have-nots. It was a time of great prosperity for middle-class America, Levittown, that sort of thing. And if you just drive home listening to the news today, what are we fighting about today? Tax breaks for the very, very rich. The gap is getting huge again, with a very small percent of people owning wealth. And polarity of the middle class is absolutely disappearing. And with that just as an issue, and with me not wanting to take you into that issue, they say, where do the churches fit into this? Have the churches ever been issues conscious as far as that? Again, it breaks down to a lot of other things coming into it. Sometimes you find churches aligning with one another in ways that bespeak not so much theology, but background. For instance, African American churches and Catholics, very strong on social issues. Sometimes, even myself, I've thought Catholic Charities is almost overwhelming in its expression of what gets done in a diocese. And African Americans have been always so keen to having to fight for their own right to a piece of the social justice pie, that both of them align on that issue itself. Whereas you get into evangelical churches and they will be less strong on issues of changing laws for the sake of social justice. One, look where they are centered. But that doesn't mean that they're mean in that level, but in the theology of the history of congregationalism, of individualism. I am born again. I have been moved into a new era, a realm in my life, so anybody can be. Whereas with a history of the immigrant Catholics coming in and first having to take care of their own poor and then moving into social justice issues, the others were somewhat removed from that. But we live, according to this book, in a rather frightening moment of history. Where are the churches? Why aren't we in there saying, this has got to be what the poor are? As far as that idea of civic religion and any kind of religion involvement in this country, one of the theses of this book is that we are the most religious nation in the world when you're looking at other developed nations. One of the great gaps of the book, and it's a really important gap, they never discuss Islam. And the nations that are predominantly Islam are very hot on religion, much more than we are. But as far as being observant, we believe, we belong, we behave. They use those 3 Bs. Much more than, say, people in France or England, where in a lot of places Christianity is just evaporating as far as practice. But at least in this country, we, according to them, are very strong in it. Even though we are diminishing, and diminishing very quickly in that respect ourselves. A lot of people in this country, we say, we are living in a post-religious era. The 1950s, and you tie in that idea of general prosperity, it also became part of our civic religion. It was unthinkable not for a family to go to church. If there was, in a middle-class neighborhood, a family that did not, there was something wrong with that family. Wouldn't you agree that it would have been unthinkable in the 1950s for an overtly atheist president, to be, somebody running to be president, to win an election in this country? We had our public religion. That has since faded in a generation by generation, less to less to less. Going down to, the cover story of Time magazine just several weeks ago. Do we need marriage? Anybody read it? Very interesting cover story. And they pretty much say, yeah, do we need it? Just look sociologically where we are with marriage. And a lot of families, grandparent level age, are in denial about it. That, what they would have called living in sin in 1959, we just totally ignore and accept now. I'm not making a moral statement, I'm making a sociological statement. What's the difference between 2 families on a block? One family, the parents are not married, and they're raising children who were born out of wedlock. The other family is married, the children were born in wedlock. Is there a difference? Is there, a social reaction? There would have been in the 19th century. Is there now? No. Do we expect marriages to last? No. It's kind of like a serial monogamy sort of thing. We'll marry, 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 marry. So why bother at all? It's just, we've come to that. Haven't you followed the idea in prisons of Festivus? Am I saying it right? The Seinfeld reference to the holiday. Actually, I'm kind of for that. Let's not celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah. Let's just celebrate Festivus. I'm kind of for it because I would like to rescue Christmas as a Christian. I think Christmas should be moved to June. I say that not really joking, because any of you who belong to a Christian denomination that uses the common lectionary, and that's all the mainstream Protestant churches and the Catholic Church, we do the year, since we follow this, we began the year 4 weeks before Christmas, but then we interrupt the year in spring to celebrate the end of the story. And since we know the date of Easter because it coincides with Passover, okay, keep that there. But we don't know the day of Christmas, so you can put it anywhere. So why not finish with Pentecost, where the story comes to its climax, and then begin the year in June? So I think we should leave them with Festivus and quietly move Christmas to June, and it'll be several years before anybody knows it because we'll always have Black Friday. But I think it would be better as far as simply celebrating. But in prisons, and I've lived with this, on the sheet of paper it says I worked for X number of years in the state system, but for many, many, many years I was chaplain at Albany, Rensselaer, and Schenectady County jails, and I still do Rensselaer County Jail. The invention of religions. And if you're going to say, okay, we belong to this and we've got 15 guys on our unit and we're celebrating this, it's hard to deny them that. For instance, the religion of choice for a lot of biker types in the last few years is Odinism. Google it. It's interesting. I call it, how white can you make God? Seriously, because it's a reaction to, say, like the 5%er movement, Nation of Islam movement. Okay, if you're going to do that, we're going to do this. And they've pretty much dug out the old Viking religion. And they're claiming it as a religion. Kids who are raised up in my own denomination, and the state will recognize it. Because what's a religion? It's a very subjective thing. Get a group of people and say, no, this is a religion. I predict, especially with all the budget cuts, that we could be very much in danger of seeing chaplaincy and public celebration of religion in jails and prisons ended. When guys in prisons fight about that, you know, say, I have my rights. I say, no, you don't. The Constitution says you don't write anything about it. The only reason you have rights to celebrate anything here in the state prison system is because the state has decided it wants to look good. If they do something, they'll have to do it all across the boards. You want to talk to God in your cell, or to go to church on the streets. As long as they do it even, Stephen. But the idea that you have to allow people to congregate has proliferated into the Festivus. The rise of the nuns, that's not N-U-N-S, that's N-O-N-E-S, in the last part of the book here, more and more, decade by decade, people who, when asked in polls, what is your religion? Nothing. They're not always rabidly anti-religion, as you see in the books, you know, God is bad, that sort of thing. But they're not into it. They're not going to claim it. And while they're still relatively small, not relatively that angry, they're there. In the book, they refer to the great change that began things diminishing in religion. They make references all through one chapter to the long 1960s. That's a great phrase, the long 1960s. For those of us with long memories, did it seem like they were a very long decade? And I wanted you to see if you can throw out a few buzzwords. Imagine back to 1960, the stable society that we were in. Then 1970, and a lot of things got overthrown culturally among young people in that decade. Anybody want to throw out a few of the things that have gone and really have not come back? Say a loyalty to marriage, for one. How many divorced people were there in 1960? How many people statistically get divorced now? The old expression, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The sexual revolution. What was expected young people down at the age of 13 could and do. Wow, different from a whole age. Would you agree? Anybody want to throw anything out before I throw out other terms? Authority. Wouldn't you agree that the attitude just in general to authority in, say, 1960? Look what happened over Thanksgiving about getting on airplanes. You know, nobody wants, anybody had the right to search them, but we want to be absolutely, totally safe on planes at the same time. When I was still at Albany County Jail, do you remember a few years ago when a young man went into a large group at SUNY Albany and shot up? Several people being wounded. He was in our mental unit for a long time, and that he really was not, I think, capable of standing trial. But do you remember that there was some lawsuit fledging initiated against SUNY because they should have known better and protected them in that class? We went our cake and eat it too. And there was a commentator who went on a local television station and said, you know, those same students, if you put in rules like you have to strip search everybody going into a classroom, would be the first one to protest that you couldn't do that to them. And yet they want to be protected from somebody else coming into that classroom to do that to them. And that's what we just had over Thanksgiving. You know, you cannot search me, but I want to be absolutely safe when I get on that plane. But in that 1960s, you have commitment, the level of commitment. I will do this for the rest of my life. I maintain that as far as people not becoming clergy, because that evaporates, has not so much as the fact within the Catholic Church of celibacy, but commitment. Do what for the rest of my life? Take a vow to do something for the rest of my life? That's why the marriage thing. When you talk about if we've come back in a conservative era, the book points out that in different denominations, in the 1980s, you see a pendulum swinging back, but it never swung back about human sexuality. There's no rules about human sexuality. And I think that's a valid observation. When you get into the 1980s, politically speaking, and you get people becoming more, well, let me put out the rules. There's a great upheaval in the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution. Then, beginning in the 1970s, according to the book, you have a reaction to it that is the rise of the religious right. Evangelism was always around, and it goes back to the early 1700s with the revival meetings that became a big thing in Western New York, that sort of thing. And that's been part of our cultural way of expressing ourselves. But because they reacted, of all the things, to the sexual revolution, and you can't act like that, that became the rise of that religious right. And as it became more politically powerful, then a second wave reaction, according to these guys, happened against them, so that you have a liberal left against the religious right. And when you get down into the 1980s, and before that you don't have either of the major political parties writing a platform on certain issues that become very polarizing in this country. When that rabbi said in Tikkun that they left them with nowhere to go if they were religious, and that would be, for instance, the left, there are two issues which, if you're going to talk about yourself as a faith person, it comes down to a misuse of the word liberal. We have these terms that we've invented, we use them all over the place, but the term liberal doesn't quite fit, as opposed to conservative. And the two issues that they say don't go away, obviously, one is abortion. The other is gay marriage. Because it's not something that you're liberal about, it becomes definitional. Do I believe this is a baby? Is marriage something that involves the same-sex people? Their reference, not mine. In the book they say that when people are arguing pro and con abortion, it's only against abortion that people will invoke God. They'll say, God does not want this. Rarely to never will you ever hear a pro-choice person say, God wants this. That's them saying, and that's a very interesting thought. I had never really thought about that before. The one side will use that, the other won't. I'm not saying that makes them better or whatever. It's definitional. I'm sorry, but I cannot go there. I'm not liberal. I don't think it's liberal to kill a baby. I just don't believe that you can create life and then destroy it. I'm not preaching to you about abortion. I'm trying to define the issue that will not go away, that you can invoke God on. And as far as gay marriage is concerned, it's one thing to talk about rights for gays. It's another thing to agree, yes, I'll define marriage like that. Two people of same sex having sex together, it's not a matter of being liberal, but definitional to say that is not procreation. You can say all sorts of things about parenting, oh, they can adopt and everything like that, but you cannot call a same-sex sexual act procreation. That's definitional. And because these people say, when you talk about marriage, you're talking about something definitional. That has nothing to do with being liberal or conservative. And that's where, for instance, in the national election before this, you had John Kerry, nominally Catholic, being presented with issues, and he waffled. He kept waffling because he wanted to win all sides. Whereas the religious right, if you will, gave people a home to come home to. You're right, we believe that is this, and we're against it. It was sure, it was definite. I'm not saying I agree with her as far as voting. One of the problems then is, do you vote on a single issue? That, in this day and age, when can you vote without holding your nose? That sort of thing. How many times have you heard that phrase in the last couple of days of people voting in Congress? Well, I held my nose and I voted for this, that sort of thing. But you get down to that definition. The methodology, I'm watching the time a little. The methodology that they use, it was a fairly middle-sized survey called the Religion Really Matters Survey in 2006, and then they replicated it in 2007. And they polled a sample of 31,000 people. Excuse me, 3,100 people, erase. 3,100 people. Then the replication, the same cohort of people, 1,900. That's a sizable, you can get a good bell curve out of that. And yet, some of the gaps in that, first of all, just because it's, if you were making up a chart, when I did my doctoral dissertation, I replicated a study on stress and correction officers and police officers, and it was my academic chair that wanted me to do it. And he said, do that with chaplains. what questions do you put in that you send a Likert scale, all sorts of questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about this? And it's your very personal thing that goes out. And in fact, I found when my instrument came back that the results were exact different than with correction officers and with police officers. The chaplains were less stressed by some of the things where others were stressed with. They approached the job in a different way, but I did not expect that. And yet you make up these things. So the questions that they would ask in religiosity, that's not a negative term. It's what, you have a person on the block and you're trying to figure if they're religious. Okay, do they do this? Do they do this? Do they do this? And when you make it into a self-answering thing, these are some of the questions they asked. You can just say, that fits for me, that doesn't. How frequently do you attend religious services? But some religious groups don't gather to, they can be very religious, say Buddhists, but the idea of going to religious service is not that great a part of it. How frequently do you pray outside of religious services? How important is religion in your daily life? Very subjective, but good. How important is your religion to a sense of who you are? Are you a strong believer in your religion? How strong is your belief in God? They don't put it there, but throughout the book then they keep referring to one sign of how religious people is, do they say grace before meals? I don't know. That's kind of a custom. How strong of a custom is that about actually measuring religion? I'm not sure I know. But you can see when you're making up these things, one of the questions that they asked, and they don't list it on this page, but it's in the survey. Who do you believe will go to heaven? And I say that's the best question they ask. Because the theme of this book is tolerance. Can you sit down at table with somebody who is not of your faith group and say, I believe you're going to be in heaven? Or you get into the real wings of the bell curve, extremes. I'm saved, you're not saved. Ooh, did God tell you to tell me that? It becomes very strident when you think of it. And there's a chart toward, we've changed a lot. We're more willing, think of the communication age we live in. One thing they don't touch in this book, if you're talking about change, they never mention the personal computer. And this book goes right up to about 2009 as being an agent of change with religions. I mean, Times Man of the Year. Person of the Year was a man who invented Facebook, or developed Facebook. The personal computer has changed our lives, would you agree, almost more than anything you can mention. And when you look at the top headline of this week, the WikiLeaks thing, what's his name, Assange? Yeah, and he's going to be bailed out to that sort of thing. Choosing my words very carefully, I would almost want to posit that that is the most important news story of the last decade, including 9/11. 9/11 had more tragic pain to it. But if you're talking about something that is going to change the world for as long as we live, what the computers taught us is there's no walls to anything. Anything your government can do can be found out and spread all over the world. Kim Komando, that radio guru on computers, always says, never do anything on email or the internet that you don't want to see in court someday. It's never going to go away. Everything you type into your computer is going to stay on that hard disk. The thought police are out there. If they find something on your hard disk, you're going to go to prison for it. WikiLeaks leaking may be the most significant for the next century moment of this era that we're living in. It shows how we have nothing that we can hide about anything, even our government. What do you do when you're taking a survey about people and you limit yourself to what you can find in research? As I've said to you already, the great gap in this book is they never talk about Muslims in this country. Hello? And it's because they didn't fit statistically. They're small compared to the major denominations. They go back and forth, and I ignored it, and I've got my little note cards here, but then I copied down, they do vignettes, as they call. And they choose about 8 or 9 churches and give you snapshots of them. A Lutheran church here, a Catholic church there, a Baptist church here, Rick Warren here, a Jewish synagogue in Chicago, outside of Chicago. What are they like? And they have a very interesting thing, and I never thought about it, and I bought it. Yeah, that's true. all religious groups have adapted to Protestant denomination structure, including Catholics, including Muslims, including Buddhists, including Hindus. When we set up a church, we follow basically the congregational style that the Puritans gave us. So that, for instance, even say with my own denomination, Catholic, our parishes become very much enclaved. I belong to my parish. And they're structured that way. I never thought about that before. And when a mosque opens up in this country, they adapt not to the way things would be over in the Middle East, but the way a Protestant church would be set up. And that, I think, is sociologically speaking very interesting. The same with the Mormons. When they move outside of Utah, their structure takes on an almost Protestant-type congregational structure. They, when they're measuring polls, a lot with what they're doing with Catholics is the Latino versus the Anglo element. And when they're doing their sample Catholic churches here, they stick around Chicago, and each one of them is dealing with Latinos in some way. But they don't list Latino attitudes here because they say they're too recent a group. Excuse me? Been in this country an awful long time. Did you ever see a John Wayne Western? Or, better than that, I'm trying to learn Spanish for years. I'm not just good with it, but go out to the film section and take out any of the old I Love Lucy films. Not now, but back then, they were all recorded with a Spanish track. And the genius of it was Desi Arnaz. But think about this. When Lucille Ball, already an established star, and she had a radio show called My Favorite Husband, and they were going to move it to television. Anybody old enough with me to remember My Favorite Husband? And she said, I want to do it with my real husband. And the response from CBS was, absolutely not. You're married to a Spanish guy. And she, you have to admire her, said, I'm doing it with my husband. So they broke. My Favorite Husband went to television, but with another actress playing it, and they developed their own show, I Love Lucy. And they had the guts to present what back then would have been called very much a mixed marriage. And yet they became known as the all-American family. And genius at Arnaz was, what made them multimillionaires was, he insisted on filming it. Everything was live back then. And CBS said, you can do it if you put up the money. He put up 10 grand. And he said, but we own the film. Multi-millionaires because of showing. But right away he knew well and sold it all through Latin America. Do it in English, dub it in Spanish. So they're writing this book in 2009 saying they've been on the scene too soon. I don't think so. Okay. Then another part that I laughed out loud reading on page 509, if you're talking about how we all live together, they take all the denominations and they have what they call a feelings thermometer. And I have to read it to you because I chuckled out loud. It's statistically what each denomination thinks about the other. Are you ready? At this level of detail, some highlights stand out. Almost everyone likes mainline Protestants and Jews. Almost everyone likes Catholics. More than Catholics like everyone else. Evangelicals like almost everyone else more than they are liked in return. Catholics and evangelicals rate each other warmly. Well, that would surprise you. And again, working in prisons, and I've always said to a friend of mine who's a priest who's in charge of ecumenism in the Albany Diocese, Jim, why don't you come and walk in the prisons with me for a while because we're not very ecumenical. It's close to warfare. So when I read a book about how warm and fuzzy we are, try it behind bars. I think it's because behind bars people like to argue, for one, and two, tend to be very fundamentalists, believe me, about everything. And so you get that if one more time an axe murderer tells me that I'm not saved, and he is, you see where I'm coming from? It doesn't sit well. But when you have groups at one time were very polarized, evangelicals and Catholics, think back to nativism, what do you do when they realize we're the only people that think that abortion is wrong? And so you gutsily begin to respect each other. So Catholics and evangelicals rate each other warmly. This is striking, giving the passed down animosity between these two groups, but it makes sense when you put it through the recent politics. Mormons, like everyone else, well, almost everyone else dislikes Mormons. Jews are the exception, as they give Mormons a net positive rating, suggesting that there's a perceived commonality, given that they are both minority religions. I don't know about that. I'd have to sit and think about that a long time. Because especially with the Book of Mormon claim that the Native Americans are the lost tribes of Israel. I don't know if I were Jewish how that would float with me. But almost everyone dislikes Muslims and Buddhists more than any other group. Jews, however, are quite warm toward Buddhists while cool toward Muslims. Well, obviously, okay. But it doesn't say how Muslims feel. And wouldn't you love this book? Because if we have to deal with nothing else in this world, we've got to deal with some kind of a rapprochement in that direction. Okay? So, just a couple other comments from the book that I copied out as quotes that I thought were provocative. Quote, "Does a devout Catholic have more in common with a lapsed Catholic or a devout Jew?" I would say immediately, if I meet somebody who is a devout Jew, and I have a Catholic who, is Christmas and Easter, I find myself, one of my closest friends again is Rabbi Susan Gulik, who is the chaplain at the prisons. And she's a dear friend. And we may disagree on how we walk certain paths together, but we are very much in common in our faith. And, if somebody who is, like myself, an Irish Catholic, and wants to make sense, the man upstairs, all these phrases that say absolutely nothing. I'd rather talk with Susan and have a good theological discussion of God, okay? Other things. The Protestant congregation model, I've said that already, that it becomes a model for everybody else. The mega churches are a new model altogether. The chapter on Rick Warren is very positive. I like Rick Warren. I think he's done a lot, just like Billy Graham. I think through the years he's done wonderful things for faith and for just bringing people to a sense of themselves. If anything, he's, I think, they never refer to him at all, but I think he's a model for Rick Warren. Rick Warren started with 7 people in a room and just said, what do people need to hear? The megachurch, you can argue, okay, it's there, and they do break them down into small groups, so forth, but if you just go, okay, the numbers, they're not breaking down for everybody. And one woman who was in Rick Warren's church, which is in the vignette part, said, it was good for me for about 10 years, and then I realized I needed something more. It's hard to make a community. People that you can go share, and the people in the community when you're in an amphitheater. One surprising thing about evangelicals is they've been very successful up until a certain point into the 1990s, and then all of a sudden, they start fading. It's not even noticeable yet. It's like when you run out of gas and you're still coasting. And I'm not making a negative statement, just statistically. They had their boom moment in the wake of the great long 1960s. But they too are beginning to lose members that way. Chuck Colson, being in prison, I follow along with what he does a lot, and he has done wonderful things. He's the man in Nixon's White House who was one of the Watergate people who found religion while he was in prison, came out and has made prison ministry his thing. He was Episcopalian and kind of moved into a non-described thing. One of the things that say it's difficult trying to categorize people who are evangelicals is because some of them have kind of co-opted the term, well, I'm a Christian. But how do you statistically break that down? It's almost like that's a generic term. You've got to break that down into something. And he took it, his wife is Catholic. The title of his first book that went famous, Born Again, he got from his wife when she pointed out in a Catholic missalette in a hymn, and she said, why'd you go with that title? And, but he said finally, okay, I've got to say we're in some denomination. And he said, I'll go with Baptist. He said, I like their ecclesiology. They have least of it. And I think that is very true. He talks about Joel Olson and the Crystal Cathedral. Didn't the Crystal Cathedral just go bankrupt? Again, that idea, if you're going to build a huge empire on something and build it on television communication, but they never mention the personal computer. Where will the personal computer take us as far as interrelating as denominations? I don't know. We're on the verge of a whole bunch of different stuff possibly happening. And that's pretty much all their ideas as they throw it out. And there you get back to the main theme. As polarized as we are, we accept each other fairly well. Fairly well. I don't think we do as much as they say we do. But by the same token, how much of that is because we are living in now, and I say it not with total regret, in a post-religious era. I've always said in my own denomination, I wish you had to re-up every year so that you knew who was on deck really was on deck. And I'd rather be a smaller group of on-deck people who are red hot for what they say they believe than just a whole bunch of people you're dragging around in a big net behind you, okay? And yet does that same growing attitude of the NONES, the nuns, say, well, we're tolerant because we really don't care. In the few minutes we got left, anybody getting questions or observations? Yes?
Do they talk about spiritualism and Christian Science is the only religion on the internet?
You know, when they bring up spiritualism, they mention a thing called.
Just repeat the question.
Yeah. Okay. Did they bring up about spiritualism? They don't, because think of what they're doing. They're doing statistics here. That's where they had such trouble with the term evangelical. Then they had to say define it more, and the non-denominational church. If you can do a statistical study, they said we put the non-denominationals in with the evangelicals because walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, that's where they are, okay? But they would say, no, we're Christians. Everybody's a Christian who believes in Jesus. But spiritualism, they have a section here where they refer to, I'd never heard it before, Sheilaism. There was somebody, I guess, on a television show when she said, I'm into Sheilaism. I do what's good for Sheila. And it's become a thing, and it gets referred to Sheilaism. And an awful lot of people are into spiritualism. It becomes a definitional thing, as so much in here does. When somebody says to you, and how many times have you heard a Hollywood star say this? I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. Stick to them and say, define for me specifically what you mean by spiritual. I have a nephew. I won't even go on. Because okay, what do you feel about being spiritual? What is it? And it's a buzzword. He hasn't got anything. He's in college, but there's nothing to attach to it. It's how I feel about things. You can be spiritual and not religious. So if you're going to say you're spiritual but not religious, that's fine. I buy that. There's a part of me that's spiritual but not religious too. It's when I'm just meditating for the sake of meditating. But tell me if you believe in something. So it's that vague area. Yes.
You mentioned Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone.
Yes.
And you also mentioned Zuckerberg and the megachurches. I'd like to know if there's a relationship. Zuckerberg had 500 million members on Facebook because people feel alienated and they want friends. So basically, it was unbelievable how it grew. Now, the megachurches also is where you can have friends, but yet stay a little bit apart. So basically, you belong to 6,000, so you want a sense of belonging. One thing that's happened recently is the alienation. The elks don't exist, the moose don't exist, no one goes to the American Legion, and that's what Putnam spoke about. So is there some type of relationship? I want to belong, but I want my autonomy. 6,000 person church would be okay. I want to have friends, but I'll have them on Facebook, and I have 300, quote, friends on Facebook, but yet I'm a bit away from it. And I also see that in the university when I go there. Everyone has a BlackBerry, a Blueberry, and they're totally alienated from anyone, and it looks like they're talking to themselves, but no one is walking around the campus looking at someone's face and talking to him. So is there some type of relationship about wanting to belong, but yet wanting to be distant?
You said that so well. I'm serious. You said that better than they don't address that. They don't address the PC. But what they say about megachurch, you pretty much, I don't know if you read the book or not, but you pretty much said the same thing and said it better than they did. My thing is, okay, let's look at what succeeds. There is something in the megachurches that is fulfilled. I watch in this area, the mini megachurches. I watch people who are raised in my own denomination going to them. And rather than getting angry about it, say, okay, what are they doing there? What are they doing that we are not doing? One thing that you can add to everything else you said is, by joining something that's as fresh as paint, they don't have to have any of our baggage. Even the non-Catholic religions who don't, yeah, we did the Crusades, everything for the last 2,000 years. Must be nice to go to church and not have to own up to anything, okay? And I don't mean that negatively, because I look at the megachurch model, and then you even went into, okay, but I want to break down and have, because they do that, Rick Warren does that. And yet the question is, how well does that work, and how many of those people that are in the amphitheater seats can you get into effective small groups? But they're succeeding on some levels, and we've got to learn, okay, there. And then when you bring up Facebook and bring up the internet and the BlackBerries and so forth, I haven't begun to process this. I can hardly use a non-landline phone. I can hardly use a remote to my TV. But real ground for, and they don't even touch that, and yet the PC's been around since the 1980s as something to be dealt with. Can you build a parish that is simply a Facebook? I don't know. And I would hope that what you got, was that strong enough to be picked up there? Because that belongs on the tape. You did it better than they did. Yes?
I guess you mentioned that they have done very little to discuss about the religions which are followed by a small number of people in this country. Like they haven't even talked anecdotally about Hinduism or Buddhism or even Islam, whereas they have at least given 30 pages for Jewish faith, and that's not more than 3% of the people in this country. So it seems to me that on one side they have given too much emphasis on certain religion and almost nothing on other religions. Secondly, I am having difficulty in when they talk about interfaith. Seems to me mostly they are talking about mixed marriages. The way I see interfaith is that people who respect others' religion. By just marrying somebody doesn't mean that you respect other religions. So the interfaith word didn't seem to me very clear. Same when they talk about secular and religious. To me, secular means that respect for all religion, doesn't mean no religion. But I guess in a lot of discussions we talk about secular when they say no religion. But I think that secular should be that we have respect for all religions, not necessarily no religion. That will be more like agnostics. And I didn't get very clearly, as you said, the word religious. Does it mean only going to the organized religion, or I can practice religion at home also? Because I'm a Hindu, and I think that even if I don't go to the temple, still I can practice my religion at home, because I have a small temple at home, or in my heart.
Again, as with you, I think you said it better than they did in the book. And you touched on several themes. One, again, not all religions are congregational. Islam, if I understand it right, throughout the world, it's not like I belong to my particular mosque. There is a mosque there that I can go into. On the other extreme, and didn't even touch upon Mormon, but he has a vignette on the Mormon church. I did not know until I read this book that they limit themselves to the size of a congregation. And that a small town, they go into one small town in Illinois, and they have no, it's not Illinois, I think it's in Utah. Yes, it is in Utah, but with an enormous number of separate congregations, because they'll only allow X number of families to belong to it. And that can be very effective. Another thing that you said about intermarriage, as they put here, moving from one church to another, which if you took a time machine back to the 1930s would have been a deep, grave thing for somebody to do, means nothing to the present generation. Intermarriage means nothing to the present generation. And if there are reasons why somebody switches from one group to another, it's very often sociological, almost never theological. Somebody doesn't have a battle with God about something moves. They move to another church because probably the most evident that you have there is the two-way saloon flapping door between Episcopal and Roman Catholic. It's going both ways. People who are angry at the Roman Catholic Church for not endorsing gay marriage and ordination for women, et cetera, which are issues, and I'm not making a statement about the issues, especially ordination of women. I'm for it. But that's not the point of the study. But you have people moving to them for that. By the same token, you have Anglicans and Episcopalians, same thing, moving to the Roman Catholic Church, especially clergy, because they disapprove of that. So they're looking for a comfort zone, and they bring that out in this book, that it's more, okay, where is it being done where I'm more comfortable? But especially with the intermarriage thing, the idea of the difficulties of intermarriage, raising children, is almost never brought up. I see that from my own personal experience, because basically, the depth level of caring is not that deep. But you said it better than they did. I think that, and I'd like to end on this point because we're running out of film, I think, that what they're saying here about polarization versus working together in comedy, and what we have as a nation in learning to live together is what we should move in and as a direction. And as far as listening to people of faith as well as CEOs, of course I would want it. But the delicacy, I appreciate at the same time the delicacy of the situation that Obama is in. And I think we should always pray, first of all, for his safety and then his success. Should we call it a day?